I love the energy in this room. I'm so glad. I'm always afraid to speak after lunch because I always think everybody's going to be asleep, but you guys are not. I love the energy in this room. Thank you so much for welcoming me to this amazing, amazing summit. I wanted to start with just setting the scene a little bit. My animal that they gave me, which I absolutely love, is the elephant. And the elephant has become one of my favorite animals for so many different reasons. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why I'm so intrigued by this animal. Did you know that the elephant is one of the most neurologically sophisticated creatures on Earth? Scientists have found that elephant brains contain what they call the fun economoneurons. It took me forever to try to pronounce that. It's the spindle neurons. These are the same kind of neurons that run through the human brain, the brain of great apes, and very sophisticated animals. And why I think that these neurons are so interesting is because they're associated with things like empathy, self-awareness, and very complex social structures, social cohesion, and the ability of people to connect. Now, I find this remarkable because these neurons are not only found in mammals with very sophisticated social structures, like I've said, but they're also found in beings for whom reading other beings, being able to connect across lines, reading situations, and acting accordingly can literally make the difference between survival and extinction. This is important because for elephants, just like human beings, the ability to hold a story, to remember what happened here, who was here, who did I interact with, and to recall a common history is one of the most important skills that they have. And we have that skill too. So here's an example that I found quite striking. Did you know that when a herd of elephants returns to a place where a family member died, something that happened maybe years ago, maybe even decades ago, something really interesting happens. They pause with their trunks, they touch the soil, they remember, they vocalize, they cry. There's a really interesting video on YouTube about this phenomenon. And the story of what happened in that place is held in their bodies, in their psychology, in their neurology, and it directs and governs how they show up today. Elephants can live up to 70 years in the wild, and their long-term memory, particularly for emotionally important events, is amongst the most documented in the animal kingdom. They remember individuals, specific locations, places. They remember loss. They remember kindness. You've heard of the saying, an elephant never forgets. It's true. Now, why am I telling you all of this about elephants? Well, because there's a link between narrative, memory, and behavior. And that link is neurological. When we experience a moment, a story that truly touches us, it sticks with us and sometimes for life. What our brain files as emotionally significant, it retains and we act upon it. A highly significant thread in human psychology is narrative, memory, and behavior. So here's my first point, and with this point, everything else that I say is going to make sense to you. Storytelling is not a communications tool. It's a biological event. Great stories affect us at a deeply significant psychological level. When we learn to tell compelling, inspiring, and timeless stories, we ensure that other people don't forget them. Great narratives become memorable and lead people to take action on issues that we really care about. So while the elephant doesn't forget, because for a creature that must literally navigate survival across decades, forgetting is not an option, it turns out that forgetting is also not an option for organizations like Standard Bank that want to build cultures that last. So how do we keep people from forgetting? It's by becoming organizations that lean into the power of storytelling. Again, because narratives that stick are memorable and institutional memory informs collective behavior. Now, knowing that storytelling is a biological event, that science supports this theory, and that it's not just about a bunch of people sitting around a campfire singing Kumbaya, I think that you could potentially change the way that you communicate as a leader, as a team, as an organization in this very, very fragmented world. Neuroeconomist Dr. Paul Zak, somebody I really deeply admire, and the founding director of the Center for Neuroeconomics at Claremont Graduate University in California, has been studying one question for almost 2 decades. That's a really long time. And the question is this: what happens in the human brain when we hear a story? He ran a study where participants sat and they watched a video about a father and his son. The boy had been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, and the father was trying to hold himself together in the present. It was a beautiful summer day, and they were out in the park, and the dad was trying to give his undivided attention to his son to really show up in that moment, although at the back of his head, he kept thinking, there may not be many days like this left. So we, as the audience, are experiencing the day with both the father and the son, the seemingly normal day, but we're also privy to the internal conflict that the father's going through, his sadness and his despair. It's a story about love under impossible pressure. Dr. Zak put these participants in a room and made them watch this video, and something really interesting happened. They all showed measurable increases in oxytocin. How many people here know what oxytocin is? By a show of hands. Okay. Oxytocin is what we know as the love hormone or the trust hormone. It's that feeling that you get in your gut. It's the neurochemical most associated with trust, with empathy, and with social bonding. It's released when a mother holds her newborn in her arms. It's released when you hug somebody that you really, really love. Have you ever had that feeling of deep, deep emotional connection with another human being? That's oxytocin being released in your brain. Dr. Zak didn't stop there. Because what he realized is that when you listen to a story that really moves you, the increase of oxytocin in your brain is quite remarkable. His research went on to show that not only was the love or trust hormone released in these participants, but when asked after watching the video to donate money, real cash, to a charity that deals with finding a cure for cancer, people were most likely to a maximum to donate to that charity. So he did something else. He took another movie where it was just the father and the son walking in the park without the additional context of what was happening at an emotional level between the two of them. It was just a boring video of a father and a son literally walking around, taking a stroll, very factual, non-narrative driven, boring. The audience had no idea or even any incentive to respond to what they were watching. So what's important to take note of here is that the story with the emotional context didn't just move people inside their heart. It actually got them to do something about what they were feeling, to take action. Dr. Zak found that people whose oxytocin levels are increased significantly are 80% more generous in economic decision-making than those who are not. 80%. So that means that if I were to tell you a really compelling story about something that I really care about and get you all moved up inside, and then I took a basket and walked around and I asked you to donate money to a cause that I was talking about in that story, you're 80% more likely to give me the money than if I told you a story that was wrought with facts and statistics and graphs and all kinds of things that don't touch that emotional core. So that really starts to get you thinking. For leaders and organizations that truly understand this, the power of great narratives, it is not just a marginal difference. It's literally a transformation. So take a moment and think back to your last PowerPoint presentation. No judgment. We're here with friends. We're not going to tell anybody. Your PowerPoint presentation, what was happening there? Was it full of statistics? Were you intentional about trying to tell a story? What about the last staff meeting or team meeting that you had, maybe a town hall or a memo that was sent out? Was it full of data, and how much of it was actually a story? Speaking of stats, here's a stat for you, just for good measure. Stories are remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone. And when you pair data with storytelling, information retention, especially in this world where we're so bombarded with content and information, we're literally fighting for people's memories and their attention. This jumps roughly from 5 to 10%, which is what you will get with a PowerPoint full of statistics, to as high as 65 to 75%. You know, in my line of work, I'm often brought into organizations when the leaders in that organizations are trying to solve one important thing: behavior. They want their teams and employees to do something, to act in specific ways, and to show up in particular manners. And the brief is usually something around using communications to address a gap in the corporate culture of that organization. And here's my theory of change. Please don't tell anybody else. Behavior is informed by perceptions, which stem from belief systems that are born out of stories. Behavior, perceptions, belief systems, story. You cannot solve for behavior unless you've spent time understanding the perceptions that people hold, the lens through which they see the world. But their perceptions, in turn, that lens, comes from the belief systems they have about themselves and the world around them. And where do our belief systems come from, do you think? They come from stories, narratives that we've built over our entire lifetimes. When you think about growing up, living in your parents' home, listening intently at conversations at the dinner table, your perceptions of the world, your belief systems start to be born there. And they become more prevalent as you go into adulthood and the workplace. The stories that you're exposed to and the stories that we tell ourselves inform our belief systems, which inform our perceptions, and in turn, these inform our behavior. So, if you want me to come into your organization and help you solve a behavioral issue that is affecting your company's culture, we have to start right at the beginning. With what stories are your teams telling? Your employees, your leaders, what do they believe? And then work our way up to what behaviors are exhibited as a result. So thank you, Dr. Zach. But what stories are informing your collective belief system as Standard Bank and the people who work here? What perceptions exist? Perceptions about clients, about colleagues, about leadership teams, about yourselves, about what it means to be part of this collective, of this community. And as a result, what behaviors are prevalent and normalized in your context. What is your collective narrative? We're operating in a moment of profound disruption. Economic uncertainty, political fragmentation all over the world. Technological acceleration is moving at a pace that most companies can't really keep up with. Our global workforce is fundamentally renegotiating its relationship with work almost on a daily basis. What it means, what it's worth, and what people are actually willing to give to make a living. And the numbers are sobering. Gallup's State of the Global Workforce 2025 report, the most comprehensive study of employee engagement on the planet, found that 21% of employees globally are engaged in their work and people are going through the motions. 21%, that's such a small percentage. They're working against the grain of their organizations. And we're paying a huge cost for this disengagement. Gallup also estimates that disengaged employees cost the global economy trillion dollars in lost productivity every single year. That's the equivalent of 9% of global GDP. Gone. Not because people lack skills or talent, but because they have lost the thread of the story. They don't know why they're here. They feel disconnected to everything except their inbox, constantly checking email. And the interesting thing is that instead of going back to the human gift of building connection and trust, which can most powerfully be done through story, what do? Our instinct is to reach for more data, more process, more structure, another framework, another initiative, another set of values printed somewhere on a wall that nobody ever looks at. But the leaders who are cutting through the noise right now are not the ones with the most sophisticated frameworks. They're the ones who can make meaning out of the times in which we currently live and how we must show up as human beings. Leaders who can take complexity, which is real, which is messy, which is sometimes misunderstood and uncomfortable, and turn it into a story that people can locate themselves inside. So I want to plant a pivotal thought in this fertile soil. Trust is actually what you're selling. It's your product. It is the thing that you are selling on a day-to-day basis with everybody that you interact with as a team and as individual leaders. Whether you're talking to a client or the tens of thousands of people who work across the group every single day, what you need to remember is that trust is not built through compliance. It's not built through policy. It's built through narrative, through the stories of who you are as an organization, what you stand for, and where you're going. Standard Bank has a story that spans over 160 years, and it's a story of extraordinary depth and resilience. And my question to you, at an individual level, is, do you know how to tell the story? So let's go back to the elephant for another quick lesson. There's something specific about elephant society that I think is really, really quite interesting in the context of leadership. The elephant herd is not led by the strongest animal, nor by the fastest, or the one who has the most impressive legacy of force. It is led by the oldest female, the matriarch. And her authority is not based on her position or a title, and she certainly doesn't have the corner office. Her authority comes from one thing and one thing only. She holds the story of the herd. She remembers where the water sources are when there's drought. Places that she visited decades ago that the younger members of the herd have never seen. She remembers which migration routes are safe and which are dangerous. She remembers which predators are a real threat and those that we can ignore. She's lived through more chapters than anyone else in the herd, and that accumulated story is the single most valuable asset the group possesses. Once again, the science on this is unambiguous. A landmark study published in the journal Science found that herds led by matriarchs and those older elephants make significantly better decisions in response to threats. They correctly identify dangerous situations. They calibrate their responses accordingly with great accuracy, better than the groups that are led by less experienced members of the tribe. And they are more likely to survive and more likely to thrive in the wild. Now, does this mean that there's no value in what less experienced members of the herd have to bring to the table? Absolutely not. But when a matriarch is lost to poaching or to age, the herd survival outcomes deteriorates significantly. They make poorer collective decisions, their stress hormones go sky high, they lose their way, sometimes literally, they become more aggressive, less calibrated, less able to read the world around them. So the story, it turns out, was not in just her memory, it was actually in her presence. In the way that she modeled how to respond, what to do, what to prioritize, when to move, when to hold ground and stay put. The herd learned to navigate the world by watching her navigate it. And when she's gone, they don't just lose a leader, they quite literally lose a narrative anchor. And I think about this a lot in the context of leadership, especially today. The most valuable thing that a leader brings to an organization is not their current strategy or their most recent idea. It's the accumulated narrative of what they've learned, what they have survived, and what they know to be true. It is the chapters behind them, the failures and the recoveries, the moments of doubt and the moments of clarity that makes them worth following. When a client comes to me and says, "Tell my story," and they only tell me the glorious parts, I'm completely and immediately disengaged. Think about any leader that you admire, and you'll find this to be true. Our stories are complex, they're rich, but sometimes where we've been is more important than where we're going. Leaders who understand this invest in their own stories, and I encourage you to do the same. They know why they do what they do, they can articulate the chapters that shape them, and they tell those stories with confidence, not as performance or self-promotion, but as orientation for other people. They give people a narrative to stand inside, a sense of, we've been here before, we know how to do this, and here's what we learned. This is what great leadership looks like, and we need more of that kind of leadership in today's world. So, bringing it back to you in this very room, if the matriarch is the keeper of the story in the wild, then the people and culture function is, in any organization, the institutional matriarch, isn't it? I don't say this lightly or to flatter you or to give you a compliment, make you feel good about yourself. I say it as a description of the actual function of what you actually do. Think about it. The people and culture team holds the organization's origin story. You hold the narrative about the company's values. There they are on the wall. The institutional memory, the knowledge of what was tried, what worked, what didn't work, and why. You're the ones who decide which stories get told during onboarding, which means you decide what new people believe. Remember, belief systems lead to behavior. They're pivotal. What new people believe about this place before they've even had a chance to make up their own opinions. You decide which leaders get celebrated and why, which means you decide what behaviors this organization signals are worth emulating, and you decide which chapters of the past are carried forward and which ones are left behind. That's not an administrative function, that's a narrative function, and it is one of the most powerful roles in any organization. Woo! So the theme of this summit is that you're starting a new book. That you're not starting a new book, that you're actually starting a new chapter. You're in the middle of a book, turning to a new chapter. And I want to sit with that for a moment because I think it is more profound than we've actually given it the chance to be. Let it sink in. You know, I've observed that there's a temptation in many organizations that I work with to get excited about new things. New strategy cycle, new leadership team, new initiative, new program, fresh start. Everyone is so excited. And this idea of that was then and this is now. We're doing things differently now, and sometimes that is necessary, but, often and more often than we actually want to acknowledge, it is actually a form of what I call narrative amnesia. A forgetting of the chapters that built the foundation in the first place, the foundation on which we currently stand. We live on a continent that, although endowed with many, many qualities, extraordinary people, etc., has long suffered the wrath of narrative amnesia. And I believe that that's why some of our countries are where they are today. Too often, I've noticed the erasure of anything that had to do with previous political system, for example, in a country, as a new administration on boards. We're quick to erase, put away, disregard, and move forward without truly taking the time to review what might still be valuable and applicable in what we are so quick to want to disregard. The matriarch doesn't do that. She doesn't arrive at the waterhole and say, forget everything we knew about this place, let's start afresh. She says, I remember this place. This is what it taught us. And here's how we're going to use that knowledge now. The choice to say we're in the middle of a story, which is a choice that you've made with the summit, is a choice to honor accumulated wisdom. To say the chapters behind us are not a prologue, right? They are the foundation. They are the reason we know what we know. They are the reason we're still here. And I really admire you for doing that. There's also a therapeutic quality to this approach. There's a study that I found genuinely moving and that illustrates this quite beautifully. Did you know, and this was published in the Proceedings of National Academy of Science, it found that a single storytelling session with hospitalized children led to measurable increases in oxytocin, there's that word again, and measurable reductions in cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and significant positive emotional shifts. So if one story can do that for a child in a hospital bed, imagine what an intentional, sustained, deeply human culture of storytelling within this organization, with your colleagues, navigating change, uncertainty, and the daily complexities of today's world will do to this continent. This is what you're building, and I invite you to use story as your anchor and to do it together, leaving no one behind. Together being the key word. Because the most powerful stories are collective stories that make space for individuals and individual differences while driving common objectives. As you build this new chapter together, I implore you to please make sure that you take each and every single person along for the journey. With a world that is becoming increasingly polarized on political grounds, economic, social, it's sometimes much easier to just exclude and to embrace. But have you ever seen the picture, brain imagery that happens when a person experiences exclusion? Social exclusion activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Not similar pathways, the same pathways. The experience of not belonging, of being left out, of feeling invisible in a group, of sensing that the story being told in this company doesn't include you. It's not just uncomfortable, it's actually experienced as injury. According to the Harvard Business Review, 40% of people say that they feel isolated at work. This really worries me. 4 in 10 people in organizations that have value statements that run against an entire wall about inclusion. In companies that run diversity programs where the right words are said in the right places, in the right rooms, in the right meetings, etc. That's shocking. But look at what happens when we actually include others and allow their stories to matter. One of the most comprehensive studies on belonging in the workforce ever conducted found that high levels of belonging are linked to 56% increase in job performance, 50% reduction in turnover risk, 75% reduction in sick days. For a company of 10,000 people, that translates to annual savings of over 780 million rand. There's a clear business case for belonging. And it's not aspirational, it's mathematical. And in many companies, and I say this with care because I know that I'm in a room with people who deeply care about these issues, the stories that most need to be told go unspoken. Don't do that. The story of what it costs to show up every day as someone who doesn't quite fit in, I've been there before, is the dominant culture. The story of what it feels like to code switch, to leave part of yourself at home or at the door because you've learned through experience that bringing your whole self to work is not going to be beneficial to your career. The story of the brilliant person in the corner who stopped speaking up because the last time they did, nothing changed. These stories exist in every single organization, and they're not being told, not because people don't have them, but because the culture has not yet made it safe for them to be told. 92% of employees believe that bringing their whole self to work matters, yet only 47% of them actually do it. That gap between what people believe and what they feel permitted to live is not a small gap. It's nearly half of our workforce carrying a version of themselves every single day to work that they have decided is not welcome in that workplace. Think about what that costs organizations beyond the human cost, which is obviously completely unacceptable. When employees behave authentically at work, companies see a 140% increase in employee engagement. When people stop spending energy managing how they're perceived and self-presentation, they can actually redirect that energy into their work, into building relationships, and into contributing. So building a culture of belonging means building a storytelling culture, one in which the full range of human experience is experienced and not just tolerated, but invited into the workplace. This doesn't mean that every meeting now becomes a therapy session, please. Right? It doesn't mean that there are no boundaries and no professionalism. That's not what I'm saying. It just means that leaders model authenticity. Are you modeling authenticity? Are you showing up every day with your complete full self at work? That leaders are telling their own stories with honesty, that they name their own struggles, they show their vulnerability, that they're able to show by example that it is safe to be fully human, to show up as a full human being in this organization. And in doing so, they give permission, expand the circle, and make the herd much larger and large enough for everyone to belong to it. Because a herd, in every member's story, is known, and the herd is where everybody comes to feel safe. So as I close, a quick thought. The elephant is not a borrowed symbol. It is something that we have imported. It is not something that we've imported from somewhere else to make a point. It belongs here on this continent, in this conversation, in this room, in this company. In cultures across Africa, from the Akan of Ghana to the wonderful Zulu kingdom of South Africa, from the Luo of Kenya to the Ndebele of Zimbabwe, the elephant has long represented older wisdom, communal memory, and power exercised with restraint and care. Not power as domination, but as responsibility, as the holding of space, as the holding of a story large enough for everyone to live inside it. These are not incidental cultural associations. They reflect something that African civilizations already understood long before neuroscientists, etc., had the tools to even measure it, about what leadership is actually all about. And Africa's storytelling traditions, the oral histories, the music that we played right at the beginning, the griot traditions of West Africa, the proverbs passed down from grandparents to grandchild across generations. These traditions understood long before Dr. Paul Zak ran his studies that narrative is the primary technology of human connection. That is how communities survive. Drought, division, how values are transmitted across time, and how identity is held when everything else is in flux. Africa did not need Western neuroscience to tell it that stories matter. We've always known. I love the statement, Africa is our home, we drive her growth. That's not a tagline. It's a declaration of narrative identity, a statement about which story this institution belongs to and what role it intends to play in it. And the people and culture team, this team, the people in this room are the internal compass, the internal ambassadors of that story. You are the ones responsible for ensuring that it is told faithfully, boldly, in a way that makes every single person inside this company feel that they are not just a character in the story, not a footnote, not a number or a head count, but a named and valued part of your collective narrative. You're in the middle of the book. The next chapter is yours to write. And the question I want to leave you with is not just what is your strategy, that's important, or what is your plan. The question is, what is your story? And are you willing to tell it in a way that makes people want to be a part of it? So remember the elephant and what it knows. The story is never really new. It is always a continuation. What matters is that you carry it with care, that you tell it with courage, and that you make enough room in it for everyone who belongs to the herd. Thank you.